All right, well, I think with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So we've got a bunch of people online right now, and I think they're ready to go. So on behalf of everybody that has joined us from out there, the University of Minnesota Construction and Facility Management Program welcomes you to this webinar. I'm Peter Hilger. I'm the faculty member and organizer of this event, so I'll be on the controls. This event is When Your Project Burns Down, Challenges for the Project Manager. The social unrest in Minneapolis in late spring caused some enormous challenges for building owners, tenants, and contractors. The focus of this seminar is not about the societal issues we faced and continue to face as these demonstrations effectively reverberated around the world. I am sure we all harbor opinions, but that is not on the table this evening. I would imagine that nearly everyone that has signed into this webinar, myself included, has never experienced the kind of events that we have recently witnessed at Midtown Commons and the Gateway Hotel. While the events are certainly tragic, it is a teachable moment for you as project managers, and that is why I have called upon my colleagues to share their experiences. So introducing the panelists and hosting this event are two Sigma Lambda Chi honor students in our construction management program, Sam Olson. Wave, Sam, go ahead and wave. There you go. He is graduating this spring, and Paige Damer, graduating next month. Paige, you can let him, I think we can tell who you are. All right, so Paige, I'll call on you to go ahead and get us started off, and I'll drift into mute here.
All right, so I'm going to start off by introducing Dale Forsberg. He is the president of Watson Forsberg and a champion of low-income housing. He's also a former faculty member of our program and an advisory board member. And then there's Dan Schultz. He's the project executive of the Midtown Commons that we'll be talking about. And then lastly, Steve Wellington. He's the owner and CEO of Wellington Management and is a really well-known developer in the Twin Cities area, including, and also owns several retail projects in the immediate area, which includes the Highland Shopping Center. And he also is a developer of the Midtown Commons. Wellington Management is a developer of retail, commercial, industrial, and residential properties. And with that being said, Dale, if you would start us off.
Thank you, Paige. I'm going to go a little bit against what Peter said and get a bit into the societal and emotions part of the project, because that's really what hit me. The Midtown Corner project fire happened Thursday, May 28th. 2020, just a few days after Memorial Day. It's still difficult to put into words the emotions the fire caused, but anybody watching TV coverage that week probably had your own emotions. One of Watson Forsberg's core values is caring for others, which includes diversity, and that's so important to us, as well as the environment. Prior to George Floyd's murder, I thought global warming was our biggest challenge as a society. Now, we have a pandemic, and we have the reminders of the racial injustice in our society. Over my 40-year plus career at Watson Forsberg, inclusion and diverse workforce and subcontracting have been very important to me, but now more than ever, it needs to be a focus to all of us in the construction industry. Midtown Corner will be affordable housing for 189 families. It's 5 stories of wood on top of 2 floors of precast. Unfortunately, because of the arson, 189 families will have to wait to call Midtown home beyond this winter, when it would have been completed till next winter. The neighborhood was active with protests May 27th because of the killing of George Floyd. The 3rd Precinct police station is only a block away. Wellington Management hired 2 guards the night of the fire to be at the building, but they were only armed with fire extinguishers. We had fences around the site, but when the building was in siege, The 2 guards were called away. We didn't want anyone in harm's way. And we are grateful today that nobody lost their lives, as far as we know, in the damage there. But we wish the protests were only constructive and focused on issues of breaking down barriers in our community, transforming lives, and building healthy multicultural communities. A beauty of this area was the diverse ownership of the buildings. The destruction was heartbreaking. And many of the businesses may not ever reopen, but this week Target did reopen, and and there's a lot of activity. There are things that are being restored. Nearly 70 workers on our site had no place to go the day after the fire. And, we were really wondering, how do we support the workers? It was a 1-2 punch of COVID and then the building loss. The unions brought out lunch the next week for a lot of the people that were cleaning up the area. And it was really neat to see. The neighborhood would come out. It was pretty quick that things were made to look better. We paid a number of our workers to go and board up buildings. They did that Friday and Saturday as the unrest continued. But some of our workers didn't even want to be paid. It was part of the communities that they lived in, and they wanted to do their part to help make it safe. During that civil unrest, Watson-Forsberg had 3 other buildings in similar construction stage that we were working on. 2 we were working in association with Tri-Construction, who's a minority contractor from North Minneapolis that we work together with on many projects and have worked together for over a decade. Fortunately, all those projects didn't have any damage, but I just want to share a little bit about what I experienced that weekend. The one building that we were building downtown Minneapolis, I tried to get guards to come and take care of that building. Couldn't get anybody. What I do on my weekends is bicycle by the construction projects that we're working on. So the first project I went by was that building downtown. First thing I see when I get near the building is 2 Humvees with National Guard in the Humvees. The guards that we might have hired wouldn't have been able to do what the National Guard did. So that was very heartening to see that. As I continued my bike ride, we had a project at Golden Valley Road in Penn. I saw smoke coming from that area, unfortunately. But the damage happened to a auto parts store a few blocks away. Our project was not damaged. Unfortunately, that auto parts store most likely won't rebuild, and North Minneapolis is in tougher shape because of that. Another project that we were doing was on a development that Wellington Management is also doing, but for art space. Fortunately, there was no damage there, but 2 blocks away, there was a car that had been burned out. It was just really sad to see that. But back to Midtown. We were really grateful that Wellington Management made the decision the next day to rebuild, and signs were up stating that. It allowed us to work forward in a positive way, and it was just so helpful to know what we were going to do next. Not that we didn't have a lot to do to figure things out. That took about 2 months. July 24th is when we got a change order to begin rebuilding. Dan will tell a lot about how difficult it was to get builder's risk insurance for the next building. The police force was down by about 30% because of retirements and people with disabilities. How do we keep the next building safe? I think the community is supportive. There was an article after the fire on the Dorn project in Finance and Commerce that throughout the U.S., investigators see about 2 major fires like this every month in the U.S. It's just astounding. And again, during the presidential campaigns, there were ads that showed the Midtown building on fire. That was hurtful, but it is what happened. So at the end of my comments here, I just want to finish with a couple of words of hope. You know, as I started, a couple of our values, core values, are working sustainably, and that's the class that I taught at the University of Minnesota, and it really has become part of our industry from 30 years ago. The buildings that we build really are more sustainable, and it is just commonplace. And I think that that is going to happen here also now with some of the racial disparities that we've been dealing with in our society. Both our industry, but society as a whole, I think has had their eyes open. And you know, many of you are students and can help this change happen. And we're here to work with you all to heal and repair. So with that, Dan's going to show a few photos and get into a few more details of the project. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to tell you my story on the Midtown Corner Apartments fire that happened on May 27th, I believe, into the May 28th. So let's see a little bit about the project. Let's see here. So we broke ground on the building in July of 2019. The project is located about a block off Lake Street, right in the old Rainbow Foods, now an Aldi grocery store parking lot. The building was 174,000 square feet with 189 units on floors 2 through 6. We've got a 6-floor building with 1 level of commercial space, and half of the first floor is commercial leasable space and half of the first floor is parking. The construction type is, we had precast sandwich wall panels from the bottom of the 2nd floor all the way down to the footings with hollow core precast plank at the 1st level and the 2nd level. And that's important because it comes into play after the fire. So the building was about 40%, a little over 40% complete at the time that it burned down. The roof was about 95% complete. The windows were 40% installed. The mechanical and electrical rough-ins were about 75% complete, and the fire sprinkler was about a week away from being able to have been live. So had we been a week forward in time, anticipating the unrest, we could have livened that sprinkler system and potentially protected the building some. We were just starting drywall up on the 6th floor, and at the time of the loss, we had 70 trade and craft workers on site. All right. As for the site security, we had a 6-foot chain link fence around the perimeter of the site. All of the accesses to the building had temporary plywood or other types of doors to secure the 1st floor. And the construction site was monitored with a 24-hour off-site security camera system. The site was breached on the afternoon of May 27th, Wednesday. I got a call from the job superintendent about 4:30 that evening on my way home from work, and he said that the building was going to burn down tonight. And I was shocked to hear that. I didn't think I'd ever hear those words ever, not in a million years. And I didn't believe him until he told me at that point that there was, the crowd was kind of pushing into our site fence and there was other things happening around the building at that time. Anyway, about 6 p.m. we started to pick up activity inside the building, people walking through the parking garage where we had our surveillance cameras. And about 11 p.m. that evening, we could see that there were people trying to start fires on the equipment outside the building. And at this point, I was pretty much glued to Facebook Live, trying to find as much information on the project, and just there was no other ways to have eyes on it. So it was kind of an interesting moment in my life. And we're suspecting that the fire started approximately 1:15 a.m. on Thursday morning. So here is a couple of photos of the fire. The photo on the left, which I found on Google, I think we've probably all seen it before. This is about maybe 15 minutes after the building was initially started on fire. And so this photo was taken from the Target parking lot, looking to the southeast, the one on the left. This photo on the right was taken from the roof of Abbott Hospital, which I got from a subcontractor whose son is a nurse. And so you can see the magnitude of the fire from that evening. I've got a few other photos that I'll share just for historical purposes here. So this photo on the left, this was taken about 6:30, 7 o'clock Thursday morning. You can see the precast sandwich panels that were left remaining. You can see the tower crane in the back that our subcontractor was just getting ready to take down. Actually, it was going to be off site that week. And here on the right, just another shot looking to the northwest. If you look closely in these windows here, these large window openings, the light gray material is a reinforced poly that surprisingly it wasn't melted in the fire. It was pretty miraculous. I guess it burned so quickly, it just didn't get that hot down there. All right, so a couple of other photos. Looks like I got a double up here on this photo. I had to take this photo because it took me a minute to recognize what this was. This was a semi tractor trailer that was parked across the street, and that was what was left of it, just from, I suppose it burned, but some of the heat from the building that was put off during the fire. And then a couple of other photos here. Then this is looking into the commercial space on the west side of the building. So we subs lost 5 snorkel lifts, a tower crane, and Watson Forsberg lost 2 mobile office trailers, and then an unknown amount of gang boxes and hand tools that were on the 5 floors above the precast that we lost. And on the right here, this photo was actually taken from the basement the following Monday. And this is a stairwell on the east side. And you can see the sprinkler pipe here and a bunch of other, ash and whatnot. And we determined that the building was started on fire with pallets that were stacked up in the stairwells. And so I wanted to share this with you because once I was in the building the following week, I put my hand on the stairwell and that concrete was still very warm after 3 days of being out. It was crazy and eerie all at the same time. So the next steps, the Thursday after the fire, I didn't get a lot done. I was on the phone fielding text messages and phone calls from people in my network, my family, people from all over the country who had seen the news about this project. And but obviously I was on the phone with the owner And we had set up a meeting for the following day, and the owner, Wellington Management, had committed to rebuilding the building. And so by day 2, we were already in high gear, trying to plan how to start this project over as soon as possible. But before we could get on to the rebuild efforts, we had to figure out what we were going to do to be making the building safe. The builder's risk, the insurance agent wanted they wanted to see if there was any way that we could salvage what was left. And if I go back to this picture here, again, you can see our precast above ground. And if we had a CMU foundation wall with precast plank for the first floor, we probably could have taken this level of precast off and built off of the original foundation. I had the opportunity to go into the basement after the building burned. In the basement, you would have never guessed that there was a fire, other than the ash that was floating in water left over from the fire hoses. Even the lights on the ceiling weren't melted at all. I mean, had we been able to get power down there, they would have worked just fine. But anyway, it was an interesting process, because like I said, we were trying to take this building and make it safe, because we weren't sure if it was going to tip over, or, it's somewhat of an attractive nuisance. We didn't want people in the building and suffer any further damage to people at this point. And so we had to hurry up and try to figure out if we could salvage the building. So we had gotten pricing from 3 demolition subcontractors to essentially selectively demolish the building in an effort to try to prove to the insurance company that this is a total loss. So we had estimates ranging from $500,000 to $700,000, and we were anticipating it would take a minimum of 2 months to surgically take the building down, because we would have had to take the plank down one by one, and we would have had to saw cut the precast walls at the first grade elevation, and then re-engineer a system to build off of the existing foundation. And ultimately, the insurance company declared it a complete loss. So about 2 weeks after the building burned down, we were finally given the go-ahead to demolish the building. And so that was the first big step, was getting that building knocked down so we could, make the site safe. Let's see here. So a couple of key things. The builder's risk was carried by the owner on the old building as well as the new building. And that was somewhat more of it wasn't a strategic move to have the owner carry that policy the first time around. It had more to do with cost. The owner found a policy that they were able to get less expensive than what we had provided them pricing for. So they decided to take that policy on. And at this point, I'm really thankful because we had a lot of work to do, but it hails in comparison to the amount of work that the owner, the developer, had to put into managing the claim for this fire, and is still managing. And moving forward to the new build, the owner is still carrying the policy, and it took us several weeks to get a quote. And at one point, we were afraid that we might not even get a new quote. I don't have the cost for the old quote, but I want to say the new cost for the builder's risk policy moving forward was somewhere in the magnitude of 3 to 4 times more expensive as the original. Let's see. So then our approach to rebuilding, a couple of things. One, the timing of the project towards the end of the month, we had prepared a monthly invoice that was mostly ready to go, but as you can imagine, we had a number of subcontractors and vendors who were either underbilled or had a number of the materials stored on site, and we were trying to figure out how we could bill or what we could bill. It was quite the process to go through and get a pay application ready, and we were concerned with what the insurance company would be willing to pay or what they weren't. And so our approach was that we wanted to bill for as much as we could, prove work was in place, as well as show the materials that were being stored. So we had both elevators, there's two elevators in the building. All the materials were purchased and stored off site. Brick, aluminum for the windows, some insulations, siding, to name a few of the things that were stored. We had a few windows stored at Pella's warehouse. We had a Pella window in there. We had about 110 windows in a semi-trailer on site that were declared a loss because we weren't able to tell if the window suffered any heat during the fire, so we ended up getting all new windows. But anyway, it was a interesting process going through trying to figure out what to bill. But we were able to get a bill in about the end of June, and we were paid that full amount without any questions relatively quickly. I don't, off the top of my head, maybe in August. But anyway, getting back to, by early July of 2020, we were in the process of repricing the project for a rebuild. We wanted to start as soon as possible. We had some slots in our subcontractor schedules that we wanted to utilize. And so we decided the best approach to rebuilding would be to issue a change order to our contract from the owner in order to avoid renegotiating a contract with the owner in the GC, as well as avoiding having to go through the process of canceling subcontracts and reissuing subcontracts. So we took the approach of writing a change order to our contract, which allowed us to write change orders to all of our subcontracts for the rebuild. So on July 27th, 2020, we were issued a change order in the amount of $11,329,000. And from there, we were off to the ground running. And here, as you can see in this photo, footing placement started again on August 12th. So approximately 6 weeks after the building burned, we were back in the ground, building up again. A couple of interesting facts is that every subcontractor that we're using on the rebuild is exactly the same team, and in a lot of cases, most of the same foremen and workers the second time around. And we were able to use all of the shop drawings from the first process. Obviously, we incorporated red lines, etc. But by doing that, we were able to significantly increase our turnaround on the products in the schedule, and also we didn't have to repay for the shop drawings, the design documents, etc. Let's see here. Those are kind of the high points. It's been over a year now, and I've been in the building several times. Here's a picture. This was taken last week. As you can see, all the windows are in. We're sided. We're in the process of painting. We have model units that are 2 to 3 weeks away from being open for our client to start showing prospective renters through the space. The site concrete is in. We're a couple of weeks out from landscaping. It has been really interesting to build this building over again. And until we were to the point of exceeding our schedule, every time I walked in the building, it was kind of eerie in a sense, because I felt like I was it was surreal, I guess. But yeah, it's been an interesting process, and I'm thankful that the owner had the commitment to starting over and building it up again. And we're really excited to turn the building over, and right now we're on schedule for that to occur about November 1st.
Dan, very, very interesting story. Wow. What an experience you've gone through here. And I think it's one that you probably would tell all of the listeners to this podcast, if you will, that you hope it never happens to them. So I'm curious, you talked a couple of questions here, I guess. Your superintendent called you. This was somewhat striking. He called you and said the building is going to burn tonight, but this call was in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
How was he affected by all of this, and how did he know this? Was the activity such that they were already trying to light fires around the perimeter late in the afternoon, and then what did he do? How did he preserve his own safety?
Well, that's a good question. So we had 2 superintendents on site at the time. The other superintendent had left about 2:30, and he said when he left it was scary, even for him. We had sent all of the subcontractors home probably starting around noon that day, and Lauren, the senior superintendent on site, stuck around, and at the time he called me, he was standing on the roof. And if you can recall from one of the first photos that I shared, we had 5 floors of matchsticks with windows and Tyvek. And the exterior walls were fire treated, but everything else was, dry, just really perfect lumber for starting a fire. And at the time he called, he was watching a fire get started at AutoZone. Wendy's wasn't on fire yet, but all the windows were broken out. Rioting had started at Target. And, looking back on it, to think that he was still on the building at that point it's nerving, because the building could have started on fire at that point and he wouldn't have had any way to get down. But I'm not exactly sure what time he left, but I can't imagine I can only imagine, the whole entire site, Target, everything was pretty filled with crowds at that point. So I think Lauren's prediction on the building burning down was really just the fact that it was a warm May day and there was a lot of activity in the neighborhood, and based on our other buildings that are neighboring buildings that were being started on fire, I think it was pretty much just inevitable, unfortunately.
So I assume that he was retained to rebuild the building then?
Yes, but in a different level. So the superintendent that was assisting him, this was his first project as a superintendent at Watson-Forsberg, and he picked up enough training in the first go around that he was been able to manage the rebuild with much less oversight from the senior superintendent. So the senior superintendent has been involved, but.
Yep. Well, I just, my question was really more oriented towards the challenges of going back onto a site, just like you were saying, how you felt like when you walked through the building is, I can imagine for them, there's issues around their mental health over the trauma of this kind of an event, especially after having made so much investment, personal investment of time, sweat, energy, whatever, into getting this project built. And then you know, you had one image that you showed there of, I think, the ramp down into the parking level or something, which some graffiti had indicated justice served, which is kind of ironic, you know. It was a trial by fire for sure.
Well, yeah, and you know, I didn't mention this, but I think, you know, after I got home having this phone call with Lauren, and my phone started pinging, you know, probably 5:30, 6 o'clock, people coming in and out of the building. And, you know, we have younger kids at home, so we limited the amount of TV that we had on until after they'd gone to bed. I was able to fall asleep, but by like 11, I couldn't sleep anymore. And I looked at my phone, and for a couple hours, I laid in bed watching Unicorn Riot on Facebook, and ended up connecting with Casey G. Wojcinski from Wellington and Lauren Butler, the superintendent, exchanging text messages for a couple hours, and the three of us watched the building burn live together, and it was really emotional. You know, all the efforts that went into getting that building to that point wasn't easy, and to see it just burn down in a matter of minutes, it was really hard. But at the end of the day, I think that the three of us together recognized that, as painful as it is, the building or buildings can be rebuilt. But I think we all had an understanding of why, right or wrong, we have an understanding of why it happened. So whether justice was served or not, I don't know that you can say that, but I think that at the end of the day, we're still going to have a building that's completed. And I think that, you know, I know a lot of subcontractors who I talked to who are working on the building. They definitely had a sense of anger because a lot of them didn't have a job to go to the next day. But I know that everybody was inspired to be a part of the rebuild efforts. And I think if you talk to anybody that's on site or was on site the first few months, they were very thankful and excited to be a part of the process. Yeah. And that's how Lauren and Dave and myself and our entire team felt.
Now, just out of curiosity, just sort of a couple of final follow-up questions here. Ironically, you also got caught up in the material shortage, the labor shortage, and the price spikes that we saw on lumber. And how did that affect the rebuild?
Truthfully, the lumber did not have an impact because it was an insurance claim.
Okay.
I don't remember the specifics. I should have looked this up, but I know the lumber almost doubled, and I was somewhat afraid that it would cause a problem, but it didn't. Now getting into the construction, you know, for the most part, we missed a lot of the material shortages up until our appliances. You know, that's a fight right now. We're struggling to get our appliances. There's another sheetrock tapers shortage that's occurring, you know, market wide at this point, and I don't know, I suppose you could contribute that to the pandemic in a lot of ways. We've got the single family homes that are jamming right now, and that's part of the reason we have that shortage. But you know, I feel very fortunate because Midtown, now being called Everlake, is the new name, the official name. It really, we kind of got in before a majority of the material and labor shortages. I mean, really, just they were following us on our coattails, if you will. And like I said, the appliances continues to be an issue, but
Yep.
we've got light fixtures, countertops, and again, a lot of our materials were already purchased. The counters is another one that I had forgotten. We had those stored in a container. All of our flooring was on a ship from China, I guess. But it got to port in like July or August of last year, so we were able to get it off the ship, so we weren't impacted by that. So it's kind of, we got kind of lucky on that
Good.
side of
Yeah, and I assume that, well, the insurance, the change order that you cited basically was based on the reconstruction cost. So the insurance company wasn't necessarily holding you to your original contract, but to the replacement value, the replacement cost, which would reflect the demolition, which would reflect any price increases that you saw through your repricing effort and so forth. So that's good. I assume you did not have to double your permit cost, right?
We didn't. You're right. The city said the permit was still open, so we were able to build off the original building permit. And I know that the city of Minneapolis really wanted to see forward positive progress as soon as possible. So, you know, I don't know if they would have been as willing to do that in another circumstance, but that was really great that they worked with us on that. But it, you know, it's not often that people get to build the same building over again unless you're, you know, a single family home builder. I wish we could do it more often because there's a lot of efficiencies that we picked up in cost savings, and it was easier in a lot of ways, but we still had plenty of challenges.
Yeah, and there's always lessons learned, even when you build it only once, but twice. Yes, I imagine your lessons are doubled in some respects.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was out on site just this past Tuesday and standing in an almost finished unit for the first time, and it's, I don't know, I think it's kind of hard to believe that a year ago we hadn't even started scratching in our footings yet. And so in a year we put together a 175,000 square foot building. I think that says a lot, you know.
It sure does.
The original
Sure does.
schedule was 16 months. And if we go from July 15th, August 1, essentially, to November 1st, we're looking at, I don't know, I guess that's still 15 months, but I don't know.
Good track record.
Yeah.
Dan, I really appreciate your sharing the story of Everlake. It certainly was to use the pun, a searing image actually of your building becoming a symbol of the unrest in the Twin Cities, and what has been one of the several images that has sort of been the visual symbol of the unrest that is Minneapolis of 2020. And
right.
You know, thanks for sharing that story. It's I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate your words, and certainly hope that the project finishes out well and the residents are happy. So.
Yeah, I hope so too. It was an interesting process. And, you know, when I heard the news of the Doran site in St. Paul, I felt terrible. And I had reached out to people that I know over there, just to give them my condolences on their building and offer anything that I could to help them with that.
Yep.
It's a sad deal, but.
Yep. All right, Dan, thank you very much. Good luck to you.
Thanks, Peter.
All righty. So Steve, you've heard Dale and Dan talk about the events of that day. As the developer of the project, just if you could sort of provide your perspective of the events of that day and how things sort of unfolded for you.
Well, we were surprised and then maybe not surprised is the best way to summarize the initial reaction. We were aware that the demonstrations and the issues that were raised appropriately by community members and others in the reaction, emotional mainly, to George Floyd's tragic demise was going to prompt a potential risk for our properties along Lake Street. We have 7 or 8 buildings and we are under construction, as you know, with a big apartment building there. And for all the properties, we felt there was a level of risk and uncertainty. We did take some comfort there, before the riots began, that there was a police station there and that there was an indication that there was, some level of presence from the uniformed Minneapolis police members. But we had hired private security because we were particularly concerned about the arson risk in that project we now call Everlake, which was about 5 stories in the air. I know, as you know, Watson Forsberg was building it and we were just about done with the shell. Windows weren't in yet, but it was just moving toward completing the shell. We didn't have a sprinkler system that was active. It was just a big pile of lumber. And we were keenly aware that when you build 5/2 construction, 5 stories of wood frame over 2 levels of concrete, that until you've got it enclosed and an active sprinkler system, there's an obvious risk for pretty major damage. We had secured builder's risk insurance, as any developer needs to when they take out a bank loan. And we had hoped, frankly, that security would deter any action. We did not anticipate how significant the group would turn to in size, nor did we anticipate that some members of that group, likely what we call outside agitators. That's kind of a hard thing to blanketly identify, but people that were intent on stirring up trouble rather than expressing their concerns from a civil disobedience kind of perspective, that they would attack the police station and take charge of that particular building and destroy it, and that the elected officials would feel it was prudent not to have the uniformed police officers providing security in the area. So when that all happened pretty quickly, we were faced with, what do we do with an unpredictable crowd, very many of them peaceful and many of them just trying to express themselves, but a few of them really intent on destroying property. And when that next door building, which was an automotive repair shops, an AutoZone building, went up in flames, we knew that there was going to be difficulty maintaining order, and we pulled the security members off our apartment building, knowing that we didn't want to risk, their safety. And it was at that point that we realized that we were just really in a very difficult situation, and it was getting worse and worse. That was about 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. So it was getting dark, and I remember talking to my son David, who was at his house nearby. I was in our home in St. Anthony Park, and he was in his home in Prospect Park, which are, for your viewers, 10, 15 minutes drive time away. And what do you think we should do? And he says, I don't know. It's pretty unpredictable. We have people identifying what's occurring, but not trying to deter people. But it's a very volatile situation. And so we actually waited until about 11:30 at night and then said, I think we got to go down there ourselves, which was kind of in retrospect, maybe not the brightest or most thoughtful reaction, but we put so much energy and time into putting together this project, and we just were hopeful that it would be spared, that they wouldn't go burn it up. And when we got down there, it was pretty normal until about 2 or 3 blocks away. We were driving north-south off the freeway. Clearly, there was just a lot of activity, not much of it not good at all, in the area. And we got within right next to the building. It had not completely been engulfed in flames, but there was a big bonfire building at the bottom that had been set. And it was very clear to both of us that the building was going to get torched and it was going to be destroyed, which was a tough thing to see at 11:45. But actually what was going through our heads at that point is just making sure we were safe. We were concerned about being trapped in the crowd and the cars that were buzzing around. It was really a situation and completely out of control. And, a lot of damage was because, there was no effort at public safety. Everybody was just doing destructive things, vandalism and arson. And, when you read later that arson's a federal crime, I just really question how many of those individuals, particularly young people that were engaged, were aware that, the FBI is going to hunt you down. I mean, this is not something you can just sort of indicates a demonstration of your frustration over George Floyd and feel that you are going to be exonerated and not pursued, because most of them weren't wearing masks, and many of them, as and afterwards, there were photographs, and they were used as evidence for those folks to be prosecuted, which is an unfortunate way for their life to turn. Certainly, we weren't thinking about any of that. We were just trying to save ourselves, and we drove out of there feeling lucky we didn't get trapped or surrounded by the crowd. It was a pretty scary situation. But we knew full well at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning that building was a goner. And but that wasn't the end of it. I mean, we lost that building that night. That was I think on the front page of the New York Times, because it was a huge and very dramatic shot of a building going up in fire. There was a small Wendy's building that was also destroyed on that same site. But there was, the next evening, there was another level of difficulties we faced at our High Lake Shopping Center, which was 5 or 6 blocks to the west. And that was also burned and vandalized. And by then we were really trying to get help from the public officials of some sort. We felt that we just needed somebody besides, and it was before the National Guard really was able to get mobilized and full. That following day, the Guard did show up, and they set up a perimeter around the balance of our shopping center next to this Everlake project, and assured us that they would not fall back, that they would maintain that protection. But they called us that evening, and I think because the officials up the food chain felt that there weren't enough guards people to manage the situation the following evening, they pulled the guard off, and then there was $1 million worth of damage done to an elementary charter school right next to that Everlake project. And frankly, now we were, sad, but we were getting kind of pissed off. This is ridiculous, to have hoodlums running around wrecking a charter school. This isn't a demonstration. This is just kind of wanton destruction from kids who think it's entertaining to burn stuff down in the name of George Floyd. It's not really honoring his name or really being respectful at all. It wouldn't take too much to hold them back. And I think the National Guard would have deterred them. And I don't know who called them off, but it seemed to us that was a mistake in terms of the oversight. I don't want to point fingers, but someone's got to step up on the public side to stop that kind of activity. And that was the night that about half of that High Lake Shopping Center, which, by the way, Peter Hilger, my interviewer, helped design. So he's quite familiar with that particular property. So all of your work kind of went up in smoke there, Peter.
Yep.
But But the hardest part on that particular subsequent day was we have subsequent to that renovation of the shopping center, which I think occurred in the mid 2000s, we had also built a 64 unit affordable senior housing building between that shopping center and the light rail station on the north side of Lake Street. And we were very concerned because it was occupied by older people, many of whom were disabled and certainly without resources. And we felt we got to get them out of there. This could erupt again because we didn't have the confidence in keeping the situation quiet and under control. We didn't have the resources. And we thought, well, we'll call Metro Mobility. It seems like that's what they're supposed to do, is transport disabled older people. And we arranged for a hotel that was empty due to COVID to transport them. We just needed a bus, and we determined that there was a bus. And then we waited a couple hours, and they called back and said, we can't find a driver, which to this day is just like, what? This isn't Nairobi. Come on, guys, you can find a driver for a bus. We never really had an explanation, but it appeared to us as if the drivers were refusing to show up to transport seniors to save their lives, which seems like, or else someone said it's just too dangerous. But it was a little bit of the thinking, there was no fire and there was no police. We couldn't get the fire department to show up after we determined our High Lake Shopping Center was on fire because they were, again, afraid of firefighters getting injured. And those trade-offs are a little awkward for us because I don't think human life is less important than a building, but the firefighters we talked to that were kind of the frontline people were saying, what the heck? This is what we're supposed to do, is put out fires. They should let us go, but they're telling us we can't. And so there was really a breakdown in the whole approach toward public services. It was, let's not risk any lives. Let's stand back and let this kind of happen. And those of us who believe in helping people in the inner city, it wasn't the finest moment from any of the public officials involved. I'm not trying to blame them. It was a difficult call. If I'd been in their spot, would I have told the police and fire to try to intercede? Maybe not. That could have provoked a bigger collision. It was a judgment call. In fact, I had a conversation with my old boss, Mayor George Latimer, and I said, geez, it was just frustrating that there was just you couldn't find someone on the public side arriving to provide those sort of services. And he said, if I had been mayor, Steve, I'm not so sure I would have made a different call. It's a hard call to make a situation like this. So it happened. And the good news is our staff, many of whom had minivans or large, we had folks from our own team go in there carrying people down the stairs because the electricity had disappeared from that apartment building. So we had to carry people down 4 flights and get them all to the hotel, which we did. And everybody was safe. And, we felt we were pretty heroic. But it did feel like if my staff's carrying people down the stairs and the police and fire can't show up, it seems a little imbalanced. But so it was a moment of sadness and horror when the thing started to burning down, and then you kind of got mad, and then you said, "My God, now what? Now what to do?" You can't just wring your hands and start pointing fingers. And we did have the confidence that we would receive some kind of an insurance settlement, God knows how much. And we then visited with a number of people who had been through similar situations, and they kind of warned us it's a long process requiring a lot of documentation, but eventually you'll get something back. It's just the last 20% is always a question. But we felt very strongly that that community, if we bailed, everybody's going to bail. It seemed like the public sector was not showing up, and we were a pretty big property owner there, and I think we felt our obligation to speak pretty clearly of our intent going forward pretty quickly, to sort of indicate to people that, just because this horrible situation happened with the murder of George Floyd and all this, destruction, that we need to start thinking positively about what that part of the community needs to be. And so we were under construction about 7 or 8 weeks later. It wasn't immediate. I mean, the decision to proceed to reconstruct that big Everlake apartment building, which was 189 units, about a $35 million building. We made that decision to rebuild quickly, but it took a little while to get going. Mainly, it wasn't the city in that particular situation. They moved pretty promptly on permitting. If you think about it, Peter, we already had our building permit, and it's the same set of plans. We're kind of rebuilding, and so to a certain, and we had our loan. I mean, it's just, you don't go back to a planning commission at that point. You kind of, if you went down for the permit, we already had the permit, so it's like, okay, you just begin, right? So
Right.
it seems a little bit strange, but we didn't have to go through that pre-development process, if you will. But what did slow us down a little bit was initially the adjuster for the insurance company felt that the 2 levels of concrete that were holding up that 7-story building, one underground and one at grade or just above grade, could be salvaged, and that we could repair whatever damage that concrete had. And our structural engineer indicated, no, that's been baked by a fire, it's damaged, it's all going to come out of there. And so there was a debate between structural engineers, which I know is one of your favorite memories of your life as a builder, as an architect. Debates with structural engineers are legion. But it was kind of an important debate from our perspective, because there was about $2 million to rebuild all that concrete. And eventually we presented the insurance company with the number for the repair and the number for the rebuild, and it was kind of a horse apiece. And they said, well, all right, go ahead and rebuild. And so from a construction standpoint, anybody interested, we demolished the concrete and also all the footing. So every single thing that was done first time around, which included those footings, of course, had to get pulled out. And that was on the advice of the engineer. They just say, you got to start over because you don't know where the damage is and you don't want to rebuild this 7-story building with a defective footing. So everything got yanked out. And now we're likely to deliver that building. It was originally scheduled for the end of October, but now everything's in such short supply, we can't get dishwashers. I mean, why, it's like nothing to do with the fire or George Floyd. It's just, COVID, and all the factories aren't moving at top speed. And so it's difficult to run an apartment without adequate appliances, if you know what I mean. So we're likely to get that buttoned up sometime in December, which is, a pretty normal time to build a building like that. So the Watson Forsberg team that has been leading that job as the general contractor has done a good job. They've just been a little frustrated toward the tail end here when some of the supply chain issues have occurred. There was a situation where we were fortunate to have staff that had MBA level training to handle all the documentation and the negotiation. We hired an outside attorney to work with the insurance companies and the adjusters. And to be fair to the insurance companies, I mean, their job is to protect the stockholders from not having a claim that is not justifiable. But from their perspective, justifiable means, quite a lot of documentation and financial work. And so we had quite a lot of staff involved in just, presenting various requests to the insurance company to make sure we were covered. And we also had the benefit of being large enough so that we had had a blanket policy. That blanket policy covers our 100 buildings. We have a lot of different commercial properties, as you know, and that was particularly helpful for that high lake damage. We had a property, maybe if your viewership here is thinking about how car insurance for them works, you don't tend to get the full value of the car. If you wrap it around a phone pole and it's 8 years old, you get the value of the 8-year-old car, right? Well, this idea of depreciated value on a building isn't typically the case. The banks insist on replacement value, and so we had a blanket policy with no loopholes for replacement. So that enabled us to kind of rebuild all the properties that were damaged by this fire. And it's not fun building a building twice. We just won the Minneapolis apartment multifamily development of the year or something or other, but how many of those contestants got to have the building twice. I mean, a little unusual. So I think there might have been a vote on the aesthetics, and but it was also like kind of an unusual animal to get constructed twice. And we do feel that the rebuilding has, brought a lot of confidence. There are a lot of very positive things we had previous to the damage and destruction. Signed a lease with Burlington, the large national retailer based out in New Jersey, for a 35,000 square foot store and a space in our Highlight Shopping Center that had previously been occupied by a Savers discount store, and they closed. And so it was dark for a year or so, and then we worked out a deal with Burlington, and we were pretty sure after that fire, it's like, well, there goes Burlington. So, I'd pick up the phone and say, you might be aware, it's been on front page of the New York Times. We had a little issue here on Lake Street, Minneapolis. It's been a little rough lately, and there's no way we can get you in your space in the next, 3 or 4 months. We're going to have to kind of rebuild, and could be a year and a half. And they almost instantaneously said, oh no, we are your partner. We are your rebuild partner. We're absolutely committed to that area. Don't think for a minute we're not going to honor the lease, and we'll do whatever lease amendments needed to reflect the different, date for delivery. I mean, I was just flabbergasted. I mean, these people are out of town. They could have easily said, geez, what the heck? Our store burned down. We got to rethink this thing. But they were very forthright and helpful, and didn't ask for any favors. They just wanted to be part of the community and indicate that was an important objective. So I do think that there are heroes out there, and not us particularly, but there are a lot of other people that have really stepped up and tried to make this situation a positive for all involved. My sympathy is mainly to those folks, and there are many of them that are smaller that probably didn't have the bulletproof, no loophole insurance policy. A good example, I know that there was a commercial property that burned to the ground, and many of those insurance policies have limitations on the demolition side of the equation. They'll give you money to rebuild, but demolition is sometimes limited. And 25,000 or 50,000 for a smaller commercial building was kind of the limit. But that policy was taken out quite a while ago, and for this particular building, which was about, 6,000 or 7,000 square feet, there was a basement and a main level, not a big building. It was $350,000 for the demolition because it's all hazardous waste. And there's, of course, different rules for disposal of hazardous waste, and there was a basement that had to be pulled out, and it was just, a lot of work. Well, there's the insurance company comes out on that one because whatever the deductible was, it was way less than 350 grand, and that comes right out of the pocket. Now, that particular business owner had the resources, but most small business people don't have the money to deal with that. And so I think there will be a lot of spots along Lake Street that'll probably stay empty or have to get sold, and the business can't really rebuild, and they will walk away. You did ask before we began this little disquisition here, did you have any second thoughts? Did you pause for a minute? And there was a moment, I have to admit, before we sort of announced we were going to rebuild, well, we could keep the insurance money, right? Yep, you can do that. And then we still have the land. Yep, we could then wait until things settle down and decide if this apartment building is a good idea or not, or maybe we should just wait until it's clear, if that's the best use of our capital right now. That was not an idle discussion. And there's no textbook you go to and say, okay, how do you pick whether you proceed or not? Particularly when you're sitting on a whole bunch of money that would come out of insurance, But, it wasn't a sacrificing. It was a business decision. It wasn't all just emotion, but we felt, no, it's, most of that insurance money's got to go to the bank. And okay, we're back at square zero with a piece of land. And, we think this area is going to turn around. We have confidence in South Minneapolis. We don't want to lose this chance to put that building back together. We spent a lot of time on it. So we decided to go ahead, but it was there were others that said, you sure you don't want to wait a little bit? And I think there are probably people in that situation that have not started reconstruction that are kind of evaluating, okay, what's the prudent thing to do, not just from we care about the neighborhood side of things, but what makes sense from the bottom line. It's a difficult.
Interesting, because using that insurance analogy again of wrapping your 8-year-old car around the telephone poles, do you keep the money you got from the insurance company or do you fix the car?
Yeah, that's
so
right.
You
Same
see
deal.
a lot of that around there. So that's a really important point, for students to understand that you are getting money back. You still have to pay off the portion of the loan that you took out to actually get the building to that point. And you sort of discount for the unused portion of that loan that hadn't been extended yet. So it is an equation. It is a sort of a management decision. I'm curious, did the city provide any pressure to you after this happened to say, like, Steve, oh, please don't leave, or was there any
No.
sort of outreach?
I think they were in such turmoil with the police station getting burnt down. A lot of controversy about the mayor saying we got to, pull the police back, and there's a lot of criticism. And that whole defund the police, or what are we doing with this George Floyd situation? They were just really mostly concerned about not having, 10 more buildings burned down.
Right.
And it was a volatile situation all that summer. So I think they were really struggling with how to manage a situation that they weren't really ready to address. So no, it wasn't like somebody's knocking on our door to, oh, please, 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 can you rebuild? And I think there's still some ambivalence about that, to be fair. I think we were conscious, and this is an awkward discussion perhaps, but I think it needs to surface, are we the enemy or the friend of the neighborhood? Are we the white capitalists that, are giving BIPOC people a raw deal? I don't think we are, but I mean, there's that sentiment that the people who should be given the assistance to rebuild should be people living in the community, especially that with a BIPOC orientation. And, those folks need a chance at, get climbing up the ladder of success owning the properties, and we should have the traditional male white developers step aside. And we like to feel that we're working closely with the community, and we honor those values and perspectives. But that's part of the challenge of the city leadership is like, well, okay, who's rebuilding and who's getting the money? And so we have deliberately not asked for subsidy dollars to rebuild, because I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
And so there's been about $11 million raised that is being managed by the Lake Street Council. And I hope every penny of that gets in the hands of these smaller businesses that really need the help. So we're advocating that and wanting to, help those folks rebuild while assuming that folks like us can, work out arrangements with the banks and insurance companies that are beneficial from our perspective. And that's one reason we tried to keep as low a profile as we can. It's not always easy because we hope that, more community-based developers do show up with the skills and resources to make that whole avenue of Lake Street, a booming place again. But we'll see.
So talk to me about, the leadership of your staff during these events, because certainly for all the investment that they put into getting this project to the point of construction and working through all those hoops, it's got to be, there's a lot of work that gets invested that all of a sudden goes up, and there's frustrations there too, no doubt. So how do you have any tips or tricks for how you keep your staff motivated to keep going forward?
Well, many of them were inspired. I think it was handy that our general counsel, Kim Donay, had spent a couple of years in a Peace Corps type position down in Guatemala. And that sounds kind of like I'm making fun of the city of Minneapolis, but it was kind of third world down there. And so she really knew how to get hold of the Red Cross and what sort of needed in the immediate subsequent to the disaster. And she was the one that mobilized the troops to transport those seniors out of that building that was at risk. And more than that, there were, son David and a number of other people that were doing the property management down there that knew all the tenants. They were deeply enmeshed in knowing the community well and knowing what would make sense. And perhaps most importantly, we had, and we still have, as I'm sure you're aware, we're a big property management firm. We sort of come across as developers, but a bigger part of our business really is managing the properties we already own. And we have a lot of vendors that provide all manner of services. And we had a couple of people that just do the maintenance and light construction, show up and start working long shifts. And one of them, I think, single-handedly prevented another building from going up in fire. There was a dumpster on fire right next to the building, and he hooked his pickup truck up to the dumpster and dragged it away and threw the burning mattress out in the, I mean, no, it's like, geez. So there's a lot of heroic type behavior of not just our staff, but really our extended staff, our vendors, and certainly Watson Forsberg as the general contractor. They just really made an effort with them and all their subs to just jump right on this rebuild, and they made enormous progress in a very quick period of time to get that building shaped up and cleaned up. So there was a sort of a disaster zone response. I think you see that with tornadoes and earthquakes, and people, want to help each other out. And so I felt that the community really kind of came together. And then unfortunately, after 2 or 3 months with the police not there, we did have, a pretty tough crime spree that reoccurred. We had, by that time, reopened our grocery store Aldi at both east and west of Hiawatha. And there were assaults in the parking lot, and just because the bad guys knew that the police weren't around and weren't very popular, we had that whole episode that really, it was 3 or 4 months after the crisis. So initially people came together, and then we kind of get things stabilized. And then because either there's no police or the police are so unpopular, they don't want to risk, lighting somebody up again. We had a lot of assaults and really bad situations when we had a lot more private security we had to hire. So we've been struggling with that a bit, and I think it's getting better. Recently, we've had that criminal behavior really subside substantially for a variety of reasons. But, I think that the police force does need to add members to their force because they're way down, and they need to go back to doing their level of oversight, because it does keep a lot of the folks that are really not having anybody's welfare at heart from doing something bad. So it's a work in progress, Peter. We're up for it, but it's a bit of a challenge in there.
Well, certainly all of your development in the High Lake area has been significant. Quite a few buildings in that area. For listeners out there, it's quite a vibrant area, and a lot to your credit, Steve, for making the decisions to see the future many years ago, and work towards it. So, well, I appreciate your sharing that perspective, certainly a very personal one, with our students and other interested folks here. This is hopefully an event that we all do not see repeated.
That's what we hope. Exactly. Right.
So that's what I would say to that. So thank you. I appreciate your taking the time to share your knowledge with us. So
thanks, Peter. Enjoyed it.